Catherine Walsh had been sitting in the same chair for 12 years. The marble floors of the Galactic Council chamber were cold under her feet, and the air always smelled like metal and something she could never quite identify. Around her, 12 different alien species talked and argued in their strange languages while tiny machines translated their words into sounds she could understand. Today felt different though. Catherine could feel it in her chest, like a weight that had been growing heavier each day. She watched the Zephyrian delegate stand up, his tall blue body moving with that arrogant grace they were famous for. His forearms gestured dramatically as he spoke. The human colonies of New Brighton, Haven's Rest, and Port Victoria will be taken by the Zephyrian Empire, the translator box on her desk announced in its flat, emotionless voice. This is for the safety and security of the galaxy. Catherine had heard these words before. Different planets, different excuses, but always the same result. The aliens would take what they wanted from humanity, and the humans would sit quietly and ask for talks. They would negotiate. They would compromise. They would give up a little more each time. She looked around the chamber at the other delegates. The crystalline beings that looked like walking diamonds. The machine creatures with their glowing red eyes. The slug-like hive representatives that spoke in unison. They were all nodding in agreement. Of course they were. It was always easy to agree when someone else was losing their home. The Zephyrian continued speaking. Humans are weak. They do not fight. They only talk. This proves they do not deserve these worlds. Several aliens made sounds that Catherine had learned meant laughter. The machine delegates clicked in what might have been approval. Even the normally neutral crystal beings shifted in what looked like agreement. Catherine felt something snap inside her chest. Not break exactly, but more like a rope that had been stretched too tight for too long finally letting go. She had sat in this chair through 47 of these meetings. Her father had sat here before her for 30 years. His father before him had done the same job. 3 generations of her family had smiled politely while aliens insulted humanity and took what they wanted. Catherine thought about New Brighton. She had visited there just 2 months ago. It was a farming world where families grew food and raised children under a yellow sun that reminded everyone of Earth. There were schools there, and parks where children played games that their great-grandparents had played on worlds light years away. Now those children would have to leave. Their parents would have to abandon the farms they had spent decades building. All because the Zephyrians wanted their world, and the galaxy believed humans would do nothing but complain. She stood up. The sound of her chair scraping against the floor seemed incredibly loud in the big chamber. Every head turned toward her. Conversations stopped. Even the constant humming of the translation machines seemed to pause. Catherine reached up and found the small switch on her translator device. Her fingers trembled slightly as she turned it off. The little red light that meant it was working went dark. In the silence that followed, she spoke a single word in perfect Zephyrian. Not the simplified trade language that most species use to communicate, but the formal ceremonial tongue that only their priests and leaders were supposed to know. No. The reaction was immediate. Zephyrians began making angry clicking sounds. The machine delegate's eyes flashed brighter. Someone from the hive species made a sound like steam escaping from a pipe. Catherine had spent 12 years learning their languages in secret. Every species had assumed she was just another dumb human who needed machines to understand them. They spoke freely in front of her, thinking she could not understand their private conversations. She had understood every insult. Every joke about human weakness. Every plan to take human worlds. Every discussion about how far they could push humanity before the humans would finally fight back. The answer, she realized now, was that they could push forever, because humanity kept choosing peace over war. They kept hoping that being reasonable would eventually work. It never did. The Zephyrian delegate was shouting now, his forearms waving wildly. How dare you speak our sacred language? You are not worthy. Catherine smiled. It was not a nice smile. I have been worthy for 12 years. I have sat here and listened to you plan the destruction of human colonies. I have heard you laugh about our dead children. I have watched you divide our worlds among yourselves like we are not even people. She began walking toward the massive doors at the back of the chamber. Her footsteps echoed in the sudden quiet. I know your real plans for humanity. All of them. Every species here has talked about the human problem in front of me, thinking I could not understand. The crystal delegate spoke in their chiming voice. Humans are peaceful. You do not fight. You cannot threaten us. Catherine stopped walking and turned around. Every eye in the chamber was on her. Some were angry. Some were confused. A few looked worried, though she could not tell why. You are right, she said calmly. Humans are peaceful. We choose diplomacy over war. We choose cooperation over conflict. We choose to build instead of destroy. She paused, letting her words sink in. But you made a mistake. You confused our choice to be peaceful with an inability to be anything else. She reached the doors and put her hand on the control panel. The massive barriers began to slide open with a deep rumbling sound. Tell your governments, Catherine said, her voice carrying clearly across the chamber, that humanity formally withdraws from all treaties, trade agreements, and diplomatic accords as of this moment. We are done asking nicely. The doors closed behind her with a sound like thunder. President James Harrison stood in the emergency meeting room deep beneath the White House. The walls were lined with screens showing every human colony in the galaxy. Red warning lights blinked next to dozens of them. Alien fleets were already moving toward human worlds, thinking this would be easy. Sir, we have confirmation, said General Patricia Moore, her voice tight with controlled anger. The Zephyrians are sending battle fleets to 12 of our outer colonies. The Crystal Collective is moving on the mining worlds in the Vega system. 6 other species are mobilizing their forces. James nodded slowly. He was 63 years old and had been president for 8 years. In all that time, he had hoped this day would never come. But deep down, he had always known it would. How long before they reach our colonies? He asked. The fastest fleets will arrive in 18 hours, replied Admiral Robert Hayes. The old man's face was calm, but James could see the fire in his eyes. Robert had been waiting for this moment even longer than he had. James walked to the window that looked out over the underground military complex. Through the thick glass, he could see hundreds of people working at computers and communication stations. They all looked worried but determined. These were the people who had spent their entire careers preparing for a war they hoped would never come. Open a channel to every human world, James ordered. Emergency broadcast protocol. I want every person in human space to hear this. The communications officer nodded and began working at his station. Within minutes, red lights across the room turned green, indicating that the broadcast was reaching every human settlement from Earth to the furthest colony on the edge of known space. James looked directly into the camera. Behind him, a holographic map showed the galaxy with human worlds highlighted in blue and alien fleets shown as red dots moving toward them. My fellow humans, he began, his voice steady despite the gravity of what he was about to say. Today marks the end of an era. For 300 years, we have chosen to be the peacemakers of the galaxy. We have absorbed insults, accepted unfair treaties, and allowed other species to take our worlds whenever they wanted them. He paused, thinking of all the families who would be watching this on distant worlds, wondering if their homes would be safe. We told ourselves that patience would eventually win. That showing the galaxy our peaceful nature would convince them to treat us as equals. We believed that if we kept being reasonable, they would become reasonable too. On the screens around the room, James could see the alien fleets getting closer to human colonies. Ships that carried weapons designed to destroy cities and kill millions of innocent people. We were wrong, he said, and his voice became harder. They have mistaken our choice for peace as weakness. They believe that because we do not start wars, we cannot fight them. They think that because we prefer to talk, we have forgotten how to act. In the background, Admiral Hayes was quietly giving orders to people James could not see. The old soldier had a small smile on his face, like he was finally allowed to do something he had wanted to do for decades. But they have made a terrible mistake, James continued. They assume that our peaceful nature means we are helpless. They believe our research stations are just for science. They think our cargo ships are only for trade. They imagine that our weather monitoring stations only watch the weather. On a dozen worlds, people who had spent years pretending to be simple researchers and cargo pilots were receiving new orders. Orders they had trained for but never expected to actually get. On Kepler Station, Director Michael Carter walked through corridors that had been disguised as research labs for 40 years. Now blast doors were opening to reveal manufacturing plants that stretched for miles underground. Robotic assembly lines that had been hidden beneath false floors were coming online. Begin primary production, Michael said into his communicator. All protocols are active. In the Vega system, Commander Lisa Bennett stood in what aliens had always believed was a simple weather station. But as she entered her authorization codes, the station's true purpose became clear. Massive sensor arrays emerged from hidden compartments. Advanced computers that had been monitoring every alien military movement for decades began sharing their information with human command centers. All monitoring stations report full operational status, she reported to Fleet Command. We have complete tracking data on every hostile fleet in the galaxy. Back on Earth, James continued his broadcast. The galaxy is about to learn something important about humanity. They are about to discover that we have been preparing for this day since we first left Earth. Every research station, every cargo ship, every peaceful settlement has had a secondary purpose. Around Luna, Earth's moon, 50 ships hung in space. They looked like ordinary cargo vessels and research ships. But as James spoke, these ships began to change. External panels slid away to reveal sleek military hulls. Weapon ports opened along their sides. What had appeared to be simple civilian vessels were actually the most advanced warships ever built. Admiral Hayes stepped forward and handed James a data pad. The president looked at it and nodded. As of this moment, James announced, all human military forces are switching from defensive to offensive operations. Our fleets are moving to intercept alien forces before they can reach human colonies. Our hidden bases are coming online. Our secret weapons are being deployed. He looked directly into the camera again, and his expression was harder than steel. To the alien governments who think they can take what belongs to humanity, you have made the greatest mistake in galactic history. You had 3 centuries to learn what humans are truly capable of. You chose to see only what we wanted you to see. The broadcast ended, and emergency sirens began sounding across human space. But these were not sirens of panic or fear. These were the sirens that meant the sleeping giant was finally waking up. Captain Elizabeth Morgan stood on the bridge of the UTS Retribution as it dropped out of hyperspace. Through the main viewing screen, she could see the Zephyrian home fleet spread across space like a deadly metal cloud. 3,000 ships floated in perfect formation around their homeworld, confident and proud. "Captain," said Lieutenant David Cross from the communication station, "they are sending us a message." Elizabeth nodded. "Put it on screen." The image that appeared showed the Zephyrian fleet admiral in his ceremonial battle armor. His blue skin was decorated with golden markings that showed his high rank. His 4 arms were crossed in what Elizabeth knew was a gesture of supreme confidence. "Human ship," the admiral said, his voice full of contempt, "you are alone against 3,000 vessels. Your species has always been weak. Surrender now, and we will make your death quick." Elizabeth looked around her bridge. Her crew was young, but they had trained their entire lives for this moment. Lieutenant Sarah Williams sat at the weapons station, her hands steady on the controls. Commander Mark Thompson stood beside her, his face calm but his eyes hard with determination. "Admiral," Elizabeth replied, her voice perfectly polite, "you have had 300 years to learn about humanity. Your people have studied us, traded with us, and taken our worlds from us. But you made one mistake." The Zephyrian leader's 4 eyes narrowed. "What mistake, human? You only learned what we wanted you to learn." Elizabeth cut the transmission and turned to her crew. "All stations, prepare for combat." "Lieutenant Williams, are our weapons ready?" "All weapon systems are online, Captain," Sarah reported. "Plasma cannons are charged. Missile systems are loaded. The new dimensional disruptors are ready for first combat test." Elizabeth smiled. The Zephyrians had no idea what dimensional disruptors were. No alien species did. Humanity had spent 2 centuries developing weapons in secret, building technology that the galaxy could not even imagine. "Long-range sensors show they are moving to attack formation," reported the sensor operator. "They seem very confident, Captain." Elizabeth could understand their confidence. 3,000 ships against 1 looked like impossible odds. But the Retribution was not an ordinary ship, and this was not an ordinary crew. "Open a channel to all Zephyrian vessels," Elizabeth ordered. When the channel opened, she could hear the aliens talking among themselves. They were laughing, making jokes about how easy this battle would be. Some were already discussing how they would divide up human territory after the war. "Attention Zephyrian fleet," Elizabeth announced. "This is your final warning. Withdraw from this system immediately, or face the consequences." The laughter from the alien ships grew louder. The fleet admiral appeared on screen again, his 4 arms spread wide in amusement. "1 human ship threatens 3,000 Zephyrian vessels? Your species truly has gone insane. We will destroy you, then we will destroy every human world. Your children will learn to serve Zephyrian masters." Elizabeth felt her anger rise, but she kept her voice steady. "Very well. You were warned." She turned to Lieutenant Williams. "You may fire when ready." What happened next would be talked about for generations. The weapons that emerged from the Retribution were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Streams of pure energy that could cut through alien shields like they were made of paper. Missiles that could track targets through hyperspace itself. And the dimensional disruptors, weapons that seemed to make enemy ships simply disappear. The first volley destroyed 200 Zephyrian vessels in seconds. The alien fleet, shocked by the sudden destruction, tried to return fire. Their weapons hit the Retribution's shields and simply bounced off. The human ship's defensive systems had been designed using principles that alien science did not understand. Impossible, the fleet admiral screamed over the communication channel. Human weapons cannot be this powerful. Elizabeth watched as another wave of Zephyrian ships exploded under her weapons fire. Lieutenant Williams, focus on their command ships. Let's end this quickly. The battle was not really a battle at all. It was a demonstration. Within 17 minutes, the pride of the Zephyrian Empire was reduced to burning wreckage floating in space. Of the 3,000 ships that had been so confident, fewer than 50 remained, and those were badly damaged and trying to escape. Elizabeth opened a channel to the planet below. On the surface, billions of Zephyrians were watching their mighty fleet be destroyed by a single human ship. "This is Captain Morgan of the United Terran Federation," she announced. "Your fleet is gone. Your orbital defenses have been eliminated. I could destroy your cities from here, but I will not." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Do you know why I will not destroy your world? Because we are still human. We do not kill civilians, even when they belong to a species that has spent centuries insulting us and taking our worlds." On the planet's surface, Elizabeth could see massive crowds gathering around viewing screens. The entire population was listening to her words. "But understand this," she continued, her voice becoming harder. "If you continue this war, if you send more fleets against human worlds, if you hurt even one human civilian, we will show you what happens when humans stop being merciful." The response came within minutes. The planetary government transmitted a message of complete surrender. The few remaining ships of the Great Zephyrian fleet powered down their weapons and prepared to be taken prisoner. Elizabeth looked at her crew. They had just accomplished what should have been impossible. They had defeated an entire enemy fleet without taking a single hit. "Well done, everyone," she said quietly. "Send a message to Fleet Command. Tell them the Zephyrian Empire has been neutralized." As the Retribution prepared to leave the system, Elizabeth looked one last time at the wreckage floating in space. The galaxy would hear about this battle within hours. Every alien species would know that humanity was no longer the peaceful victim they could push around. The war had truly begun, but it would not last long. Admiral Thomas Reed watched the enemy fleet approach through the viewing window of his flagship. 10,000 alien warships moved through space in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming under the light of distant stars. It was the largest military force ever assembled in galactic history. Behind Thomas stood the commanders of 11 other human vessels. 12 ships against 10,000. The aliens probably thought this would be the easiest victory in the history of warfare. "Sir," said Commander Helen Brooks from the communication station, "we are receiving a transmission from the enemy flagship." Thomas nodded. "Put it through." The main screen flickered to life, showing representatives from 9 different alien species standing together on what appeared to be a massive bridge. The Crystal Collective's leader stood in the center, his diamond-like body reflecting the light from dozens of sources. To his left, the machine creatures of the dynasty hummed with electrical power. On the right, the slug-like beings of the hive worlds pulsed in unison. "Human fleet," the crystal leader spoke in his chiming voice, "you are outnumbered more than 800 to 1. This is your final chance to surrender. Accept defeat now, and your deaths will be swift." One of the machine creatures stepped forward, its red eyes glowing brighter. "We have studied your victory over the Zephyrians. One lucky battle does not make you warriors. Today you face the combined might of 9 species. Today you learn the price of defying the galactic order." Thomas looked at his fellow commanders. Captain Jennifer Walsh of the Defiance was smiling slightly. Commander Paul Anderson of the Vengeance was checking his weapon systems. These were not the nervous faces of people expecting to die. These were the faces of hunters who had finally found their prey. "Open a channel," Thomas ordered. When the communication line was active, Thomas stepped forward so all the alien leaders could see him clearly. "You know, it is interesting that you mentioned the Zephyrians. Do you know what they said before we destroyed their fleet?" The aliens looked confused. The crystal leader tilted his head in what might have been curiosity. "They said exactly the same thing you just said," Thomas continued. "They told us we were outnumbered. They told us we were weak. They promised us quick deaths." He paused. 3,000 of their ships learned how wrong they were. The machine creature's eyes flashed angrily. The Zephyrians were arrogant and unprepared. We have studied human tactics. We know your weapons now. You cannot surprise us. Thomas almost felt sorry for them. Almost. You studied one battle, he said quietly. One demonstration. You think you understand human weapons because you saw us destroy ships that were already obsolete. He looked directly at the Crystal Leader. Tell me, what do you know about human defensive systems? Before the aliens could answer, Thomas cut the transmission and turned to his crew. All ships, this is Admiral Reed. You know what these creatures have done to our people. You have seen the reports from the colonies they destroyed. You have heard the recordings of human children crying as their homes burned. His voice became harder. Today we show them why Earth survived ice ages and asteroid impacts. Today they learn why humans explored space when other species were still afraid of fire. Today they discover what happens when you threaten the children of Earth. The alien fleet opened fire first. 10,000 ships launched everything they had at the 12 human vessels. Plasma bolts, missiles, energy beams, and weapons that most species considered planet killers filled the space between the two fleets. The human ships simply vanished. For a moment, the aliens thought they had won. Their sensors showed empty space where the human fleet had been. Victory celebrations began on several of the alien ships. Then the human vessels reappeared, completely undamaged, in the middle of the alien formation. What followed was not a battle. It was an execution. The human ships moved through space in ways that physics said should be impossible. They seemed to exist in several places at once. Their weapons fired through dimensional barriers that the aliens did not even know existed. Enemy ships exploded before their crews could understand what was happening. Impossible, screamed the Crystal Leader over the communication channel that was somehow still active. Ships cannot phase shift through solid matter. Weapons cannot target enemies in alternate dimensions. Thomas appeared on their screens again. His ship was moving through the alien formation like a shark through a school of fish. You are right, he said calmly. Ships cannot do these things. Alien ships cannot do these things. 1,000 enemy vessels died in the first minute. 2,000 more in the second. The machine creatures tried to coordinate a defense, but their targeting systems could not lock onto ships that existed in multiple dimensions at once. Please, the Hive World's representative begged. We surrender. We surrender. Thomas looked at the destruction around him. Burning alien ships filled space as far as his sensors could reach. The combined fleet of 9 species was being destroyed by 12 human vessels, and not one human ship had taken even minor damage. You surrendered too late, he said. You should have surrendered 300 years ago when we first asked you to treat us as equals. The battle ended in 6 minutes and 43 seconds. Of the 10,000 alien ships that had approached Earth with such confidence, fewer than 100 survived. These survivors were badly damaged and barely functional. Thomas opened a broadcast to the remaining alien commanders floating in escape pods and damaged ships. Go home, he told them. Tell your governments what you have seen here. Tell them that humanity is no longer asking for peace. We are enforcing it. He paused, looking out at the debris field that had once been the greatest fleet in galactic history. And tell them that if any species ever threatens human civilians again, we will not show mercy. This was humanity being gentle. You do not want to see us when we are truly angry. Catherine Walsh stood at the podium in the great assembly hall, looking out at faces that had once looked at her with contempt. The same marble floors, the same high ceiling, but everything else had changed completely. Where alien delegates had once lounged in positions of power, they now sat quietly in the back rows, waiting for permission to speak. The humans sat in the front now. President Harrison occupied the chair that had belonged to the Crystal Collective for 2 centuries. Admiral Hayes stood beside him, his uniform displaying medals that represented the complete destruction of alien military power. The message was clear to everyone in the room. The old galactic order is dead, Catherine began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber that had once echoed with alien laughter at human expense. It died the moment you decided that might makes right. It died when you chose to see our peaceful nature as weakness instead of strength. In the back of the chamber, the surviving alien delegates shifted uncomfortably. The Zephyrian representative was new, the old one had died when his homeworld's government fell. The Crystal Collective leader was cracked down one side, a visible reminder of their recent defeat. Even the machine creatures seemed dimmed, their usual electrical humming barely audible. Catherine had dreamed of this moment during all those years of sitting quietly while aliens divided up human worlds. But now that it was here, she felt no joy. Only a deep sadness for all the lives that could have been saved if the galaxy had chosen differently. Humanity never wanted to rule, she continued. We wanted to be partners. We wanted to build a galaxy where different species could work together for the good of everyone. You made that impossible when you decided we were too weak to deserve respect. President Harrison stood up from his chair and walked to join Catherine at the podium. At 64, he looked tired, but his voice was strong when he spoke. The new Galactic Charter is simple, he announced. All species will treat each other with respect. All disputes will be resolved through discussion, not force. Any species that uses military power to take what belongs to another will face immediate response from Terran Defense Forces. Through the great windows of the assembly hall, everyone could see Earth rotating peacefully below. But surrounding the blue planet was a sight that made every alien delegate remember why they were sitting in the back rows now. Hundreds of human warships hung in perfect formation around Earth, their weapons pointed outward toward the galaxy. The Crystal Leader raised one of his diamond arms. We accept the new order, he said, his chiming voice much quieter than it had been in the old days. But what guarantee do we have that humans will not become what we were? What stops you from taking our worlds as we took yours? Catherine looked at him for a long moment. Because we are still human, she said simply. We did not fight this war because we wanted to conquer. We fought because you gave us no choice. The moment you stop threatening human civilians, the moment you start treating all species fairly, our weapons will be used only for defense. Admiral Hayes stepped forward. His weathered face showed the strain of the past year, during which he had overseen the complete restructuring of galactic military power. But understand this clearly, he said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. We will be watching. Every species, every government, every military force in the galaxy is now under Terran observation. He gestured toward the windows, where the human fleet was visible. Those ships carry weapons that your scientists cannot understand. They are crewed by people who remember what you did to our colonies. They remember the children who died in your accidents. They remember the families who lost their homes because you wanted their worlds. The machine delegate's red eyes flickered weakly. How long will this observation continue? President Harrison looked at Catherine, who nodded slightly. They had discussed this question many times in the planning sessions that followed humanity's military victories. Until you prove that you have learned, Catherine answered. Until every species in this galaxy can look at their neighbors and see partners instead of threats. Until children can grow up on any world without fear that aliens will decide their planet needs to be redistributed for strategic purposes. She walked closer to the alien delegates, and several of them actually moved back in their seats. The movement was small, but everyone noticed it. The species that had once terrorized the galaxy were now afraid of a single human woman with no weapons. You taught us an important lesson, Catherine said softly. You taught us that sometimes, being nice is not enough. Sometimes, you have to show your strength before others will respect your kindness. She paused. We will never forget that lesson. The Hive representative spoke in their unified voice, all three of their slug-like bodies moving in sync. What of our colonies? Our trade routes? Our territorial claims? You will keep what you can defend fairly, Admiral Hayes replied. Any world that wants to leave your empire may do so. Any species that feels oppressed by your rule can ask for Terran protection. The age of forcing others to submit to your will is over. Catherine returned to the podium and looked out over the assembly one final time. The galaxy is entering a new age, she announced. An age where strength serves peace instead of conquest. Where powerful species protect weaker ones instead of exploiting them. Where the word human means protector instead of victim. She picked up the formal charter that would govern galactic relations for generations to come. Article 7 of this charter states that humanity reserves the right to withdraw protection from any species that returns to the old ways. I suggest you all remember that when you return to your home worlds. The ceremony ended, and the alien delegates filed out quietly. Catherine remained at the podium, looking through the windows at the blue world below. Earth looked so peaceful from here, but she knew that humanity had changed forever. They had learned that sometimes you had to fight for peace. The galaxy would never again mistake human kindness for weakness.